Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am He. I am He who will sustain you. I have made you and I will carry you. Isaiah 46:4. The sun had long dipped behind the trees, casting long violet shadows across the little wooden house on Sycamore Lane. The air was still, warm, and filled with the hum of late summer crickets. Inside, the house was quiet, not the kind of lonely quiet that hurts, but the kind that feels like a quilt laid gently over the shoulders of the night. By the window sat an old chair, its fabric faded by the sun and time. It faced a small garden, just a patch of green, a few daisies, and a bird bath that hadn't held a bird all week. But still, the chair sat there faithfully, as it had for years. And next to that chair, in a soft beige robe and with a cup of chamomile tea in hand, sat Mrs. Eliza Wren. She was 84. Her hands were slow but steady, her breath gentle. Her eyes, though dimmed, still held a kind of sky blue wonder in them, the kind you see in children and people who have learned to trust. Eliza had lived a long life, not loud, not famous, but full. And now, in this soft season of twilight, she found herself drawn more and more to the window and to the stillness that lived there. The chair had once been her husband's. Jonah Wren, a kind man with strong hands and a laugh that used to bounce off the kitchen walls. He had gone home 5 winters ago on a quiet morning when the snow was falling like feathers and the house was filled with the smell of cinnamon bread. Since then, the chair had stayed by the window, unmoved, waiting. Some days, she talked to it. Not out loud, not always, but inwardly. Whispered prayers, simple thoughts. You would have loved this rain, she'd say. Or the birds came back this morning and were the blue ones you liked. She didn't think of it as strange. She thought of it as faithfulness. Tonight, as she sat by that chair, the wind moved through the trees like a lullaby, and in her soul, something deep exhaled. She didn't know exactly why, but this evening felt tender, as if God Himself were drawing closer. And so she spoke, barely above a whisper. I'm still here. Lord, I'm still listening. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Let the quiet of this room settle into your spirit. She sipped her tea slowly. She closed her eyes. And in the stillness, she remembered a time long ago when she first learned that God could be near, even in the most silent places. That story, it began with a garden. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You are not forgotten. Even now, even here, God is near, and He remembers you by name. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. It was spring and long ago now, but still as fresh in Eliza's memory as the scent of lilacs in bloom. She had been 17 then, full of questions, not many answers. Life at home had been loud in ways the world couldn't hear. Her father had been a good man, but tired, worn thin by work and the weight of unspoken grief. Her mother, kind but distracted, moved through the days like someone carrying something too heavy in both arms. Eliza had often wandered outside to escape the invisible tension that lingered in the house like damp air. Behind their little home, through a thin line of trees, was an old stone wall, crumbling in places. And in the middle of that wall, as if no one had meant for it to be, there was a small green door. It wasn't tall and it didn't lock, just a low wooden gate with peeling paint and ivy curled around its hinges. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, But Eliza did. She had passed it many times before she ever dared open it. There was something sacred about it, the way it stood there quietly, without demanding attention, like a secret waiting to be remembered. And one quiet morning, after a long night of tears she couldn't quite explain, she placed her hand on the cool, rough wood and pushed. The door creaked just a little, and beyond it, there was stillness, a kind of stillness she hadn't known before. It wasn't an empty kind of quiet. No, it was a full, humming kind of hush, the kind that made you whisper without knowing why. Birds moved in the trees overhead. Ferns waved gently in the wind. A small bench, old, carved, and half covered in moss, stood near the center. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, Eliza sat, not to escape, not to plan, just to sit, just to be. She could not have explained it at the time, but her heart knew it. God was in that garden. Not in a thunderous voice, not in a vision, just in the air, in the way time seemed to slow, in the way her shoulders dropped for the first time in a while. She whispered then, not knowing if he'd hear, "Are you here?" And though no sound answered, something in her chest warmed. Yes, she didn't hear it with her ears, but her soul leaned toward it like a flower towards sunlight. "Yes, I am here." She came back the next day and the day after, and many days that followed. That little garden, no bigger than a living room, became a holy place for her. The green door, her invitation to stillness. And now, all these years later, sitting by the window in her robe, with the tea growing lukewarm beside her, she could still feel it, that hush, that presence, and she smiled quietly, because she knew something true. That same stillness, that same God said I was here too, right here, in the chair beside her, in the evening breeze, in her breath. Take a deep breath, feel the quiet unfold around you, like the soft closing of that green garden gate. You are safe here. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Stillness is not emptiness. It is the space where God draws near gently, lovingly, without needing to speak loud. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. John 14:27. Eliza once read that peace was not the absence of trouble, but the presence of someone deeper than the trouble. She hadn't fully understood it until the summer she turned 38. By then, she and Jonah had been married 12 years. A quiet, steady love had grown between them, not flashy, not loud, but deep, like river water, the kind you don't always see rushing, but that wears down stone and feeds the roots of trees. They had a small house, then a different one than the one she lived in now. It was nestled behind a hill, where neighbors couldn't see the garden out back. And that was just how they liked it. Behind that hill, in the space where most people would have planted grass or built a shed, Jonah built a bench. He didn't tell her why at first. He just spent 3 Saturdays in a row cutting and sanding, his hands thick with dust and the smell of cedar. When he finished, he led her out back, gently covering her eyes with a calloused hand. And there it was, the bench. Simple, handmade, just wide enough for 2. She had smiled. "What's it for?" she'd asked. He'd looked at her not in a way that tried to impress, but in a way that let her know she was known, and said, "For sitting beside you when the world gets too loud." That was Jonah. Not many words, but the right ones. They sat on that bench many evenings, sometimes in conversation, sometimes in silence, sometimes with laughter. sometimes with quiet tears. Life had seasons, and so did they. Not everyone was bright, but everyone had that bench, and they shared something on that bench that the world rarely gave peace without explanation. Some evenings, she'd lean her head on his shoulder and say nothing at all, and he wouldn't ask her to. Other nights, she'd talk about her worries, her aging parents, their finances, the ache in her chest that wouldn't leave, and he'd just hold her hand, not fixing, just staying. There was a holiness in that, a bench for two, and a kind of love that listened more than it answered. Now, many years later, Eliza thought of that bench often. Jonah was gone. The bench was gone too, left behind when they moved, but the memory, that stayed. And in a quiet way, she still felt him beside her. More than that, she felt the same peace, not because the world had grown quieter, but because her soul had. She had learned over time that the truest kind of peace is not tied to circumstances, and it's tied to presence. Jonah had given her that, and so had God. Take a deep breath. Imagine the bench. Picture yourself there, beside someone who needs no words to understand your heart. Let peace come to you like twilight. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Peace is not the absence of noise, but the presence of love sitting quietly beside you, even now. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Eliza didn't open that drawer often. It was the second one down, right beside the sink, the one where most people would keep spoons or napkins. But hers held something different. Letters, old ones. Some yellowed, some folded many times over. Their creases softened by years of being opened and reread in the quiet moments when the house was still. They were all from Jonah. Some written before they were married, some after. She kept them tucked neatly together with a soft blue ribbon, not tight, just enough to keep them close. She'd never intended to save so many. But once he was gone, they became more than memories. They became presents. Some nights, when the ache in her chest rose up slow and uninvited, she'd go to the drawer and untie the ribbon. Her finger, slower now, still remembered the folds, still remembered where he'd placed a small doodle or underlined a phrase twice. Thinking of you. Don't forget to rest. You are more than enough. Simple words, nothing grand, but they had held her together more than once. She remembered one evening in particular, the year after Jonah had passed. The wind had knocked the power out, and the house was full of shadows. She'd lit a candle, not to see by, but to feel less alone. And in that flickering light, she'd opened the drawer and pulled out one letter at random. It read, "If you ever feel alone, remember this, my love sits beside you, even when I don't. And more than that, his love holds us both." She wept, not loudly, just enough for a tear to rest on the paper. And that night, she wasn't alone, because grief, while heavy, isn't the opposite of love. It's proof of it. And as she placed the letter back into the ribbon's hold, she whispered aloud into the candlelit kitchen, "Thank you, Lord, for letting me be loved like this." Now sitting by her window again years later, tea refilled, night deepening, she thought of that drawer. She didn't need to open it tonight. She carried the letters inside her now, and somehow, she knew that God had written her letters too, not on paper, but on moments, on silence, on soft winds and deep sleep. on the laughter of grandchildren and the hush of dusk. He had written himself into her life, slowly, gently, lovingly. Take a deep breath. Feel the nearness of the one who knows every word you've ever needed and holds them for you. Always. Bedtime spiritual takeaway: love does not end at the edge of loss. What was true remains true, and the Lord stays near, even when the world feels far. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. It was a ritual now. Every Sunday morning, Eliza would wake slowly, and not with the urgency of a schedule, but with the gentleness of memory. She didn't move quickly anymore. The bones were slower, the joints tender. But the soul still rose early. Her little house caught the sun just right on Sundays. The golden light would stream through the east-facing window beside the dining table, touching the old lace curtains like fingers searching for warmth. She always sat there, at that table, in the same wooden chair Jonah once polished. A thin white tablecloth lay across the surface, and a small cross hand carved by her grandson rested in the center. Nothing dramatic, just presence. There was no rush, no need to dress in her old church clothes. Not anymore. She used to go every week, for decades. Sat in the same pew, hummed the same hymns, bowed her head when the preacher prayed. But now, her body didn't always let her go, and for a time she grieved that. She missed the voices, the handshakes, the small nods of those who knew your name without needing to say it. But then, she began to notice something else. The presence of God didn't stay in church buildings. He came with her, into this quiet Sunday window. He met her in the warm steam of her tea, in the rustle of birds outside, in the scripture verses she now read aloud to herself, gently like lullabies for the morning. This was worship too. It had taken time for her to believe that. At first she felt guilty, as if not being at church made her less faithful. But one morning, as she sat with the old Bible in her lap and the sun washing her face in gold, a stillness came, and she heard it again, not with her ears, but in that way the soul knows. Come to me, all who are weary. She had memorized that verse long ago, but now it met her like an old friend who saw her fully. Come to me, not to a place, not to a building. Who to me. So she did. She whispered her thanks, offered her prayers, listened in silence, and that little window with the lace curtains and the soft morning sun became holy. Sanctuary. The Lord had not left her. He had only moved closer. And now each Sunday, she didn't worry about the place she sat in, only the person she sat with. Take a deep breath. Let the light of that quiet window touch your heart. You do not need to strive. You do not need to go far. He is already here. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't have to reach far to find God. He finds you in your chair, in your weakness, in your quiet worship. He is already near. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am He. I will carry you. Isaiah 46:4. Eliza loved the porch most in autumn. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that wrapped around you like a knitted shawl, soft and worn and full of memory. The swing creaked gently as she sat back, not from disrepair, just from age. Like her knees, like her soul, perhaps. She kept a pillow on it now, and a quilt folded on the side in case the wind turned. The trees had begun their turning, and orange leaves were scattered across the steps like blessings dropped by heaven careless. Beautiful, unnecessary but entirely welcome. Eliza didn't rake them. She liked how they looked, like time had passed and left its poetry behind. She sipped slowly from her mug cinnamon apple tea today. Something about the spice reminded her of childhood, of her mother humming in the kitchen and the way the old wood stove would tick as it cooled. She closed her eyes, listened. The wind was saying something, not loudly, but faithfully. A whisper that repeated through the branches. You are still being carried. That thought made her smile. Carried. It was a strange word for someone her age. At 84, she was the one who used to carry others. Groceries, children, worries. Words that were never said aloud. But now her arms were tired, that her legs slower, and that her voice softer. And yet she didn't feel forsaken. Not empty, not left behind. Just held. It reminded her of something Jonah used to say, back when their grandkids were small. He'd scoop them up after they'd fallen or scraped a knee and whisper, "You're not too heavy for me." She remembered the way he said it, not with effort, with love. She imagined God saying that now, over her life, over the nights she couldn't sleep, over the fears that still curled up at the foot of her bed. "You're not too heavy for me." She looked out over the porch rail and watched as one small leaf spun its way down. Soft and slow, it landed on the swing beside her. She didn't move it. She let it rest, like she had learned to do. Take a deep breath. Let yourself be carried for a moment. You don't have to hold yourself up tonight. You can rest. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even now, even here, even with all that you carry, you are being carried too. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. Psalm 34:15. There was something Eliza had learned in her later years. God listens, not as a distant ruler from a throne too high to hear, but as a father on the edge of his seat, leaning in, attentive. She didn't always feel him, but she'd come to trust that he was near, especially in the quiet hours, especially when no one else seemed to be. It was a slow discovery, one that took years to fully settle into her bones, but it had begun, strangely, with a simple notebook. It was the kind of journal you could find anywhere, plain brown cover, spiral binding, the faint scent of paper and glue. She'd picked it up at the corner store one day, not intending much by it, but that night, as the rain tapped gently on her bedroom window and the lamp cast a circle of gold around her chair, she'd opened it and written only one line, "Lord, are you there?" Nothing followed. She hadn't even meant to write it, really. It just came, and for some reason she didn't tear it out. She closed the book, set it beside the lamp, and went to bed. The next night, she wrote again. "I'm tired today, I'm not sure why. The house feels heavier when it rains." She didn't expect answers. She didn't even expect peace. But strangely, over time, a peace came. Not from what she wrote, but from what she felt as she wrote. Someone was listening. Not in the room, not in the way sound travels, but in the deep, soul-soft way that God listens. Patient, kind, never interrupting. She wrote almost every evening after that. Sometimes long entries, sometimes a single word. Some days she only wrote, "Help." Other days she wrote thank yous for birdsong or for a phone call from her niece. No one else read those pages. She never shared them, never posted them, never even reread them much. It wasn't about the words. It was about the knowing that she was heard. She never doubted that anymore. Even in silence, God listens. Take a deep breath. Let your thoughts become gentle. Let your heart rest from explaining. You are already heard. Bedtime spiritual takeaway prayer isn't always loud or eloquent. Sometimes it's a sigh, a whisper, a page turned in a quiet room, and still, God listens. My times are in your hands. Psalm 31:15. Eliza had come to appreciate the slow ticking of the old grandfather clock. Once, when she was younger, it had annoyed her. Its deep, patient rhythm seemed to fill the room when everything else was quiet, a steady reminder of passing time. Too slow when she was busy, too loud when she was sad. But now, she loved it. It didn't rush her, it didn't demand anything. It simply kept time, faithfully. The clock had belonged to her father. It had stood in their entryway for as long as she could remember. As a girl, she used to sit on the bottom stair and watch the pendulum swing. Left, right, left, right. It felt like a breath that never stopped. She'd asked her father once why he didn't replace it with something newer, something quieter. He had smiled, not looking up from his newspaper. Because this one doesn't mind waiting, he'd said. Urut. She didn't understand it then, but she did now. Time has its own rhythm, and the older you get, the more you see how little of it you actually need to control. There were years she had filled to the brim, always doing, always preparing, always trying to keep up. Back then, she had feared falling behind. But in this season, slowing down wasn't failure. It was grace. She didn't rise at dawn anymore. She didn't fill her calendar with appointments or errands. Some days passed with little more than a walk to the mailbox and a quiet lunch on the porch. But they were full, in a quiet way. And the clock kept ticking slow, patient, constant. She began to think of it as a kind of companion. Its soft chimes marked her days like gentle chapters, morning, midday, evening, rest. Each chime reminded her that she was still here, still held, still within the hands of God. Because her times even now, even with gray hair and slower steps, were not forgotten. They were cared for. On her slower days, she would whisper to herself, I'm not behind. I'm not late. I'm not wasting time, but I'm resting in it. And somehow that made all the difference. Take a deep breath. Let time slow. Let the clock tick without fear. You are not in a hurry, and you are not alone in the waiting. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God is not rushed, and your life is not behind. Even in the slow seasons, your time is still in His hands. And He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. Psalm 91:4. The rain had started sometime in the early evening. Soft at first, like fingertips on a drum, then steadier. A rhythm that neither rushed nor relented. Just steady, kind, and familiar. Eliza had always found comfort in rain. She knew some people found it gloomy, but to her, it felt like permission. Permission to stop, to breathe, to sit without doing. The world seemed to pause when it rained, as if heaven whispered, You don't have to carry so much today. She had lit a candle, one with the scent of sandalwood and old books. The flame danced gently beside her Bible, casting shadows that looked like waves on the wall. And overhead, the steady hush of rain on the rooftop. It brought back a memory. She was 19, home from college for the weekend. The house had been quieter than usual, her parents tired, her brothers scattered. That night, a summer storm had rolled in, and she lay awake listening. And for the first time in her life, she prayed not with words, but with silence. Just listening. Listening to the rain, to her breath, to the stillness of God. She didn't know how to explain it, but something in her shifted that night. Not drastically. Just enough. Just a single thread of anxiety untied. A knot in her chest loosened. A whisper deep within saying, "I've got you." Now, decades later, she still remembered that exact moment, and every time it rained, something in her settled. Not because life had become easier, but because she had learned something true. God often speaks in the hush, not in the whirlwind, not in the shouting, but in the rain. Soft and sure. Tonight, the drops tapped like a lullaby on the rooftop. The candle's flame held steady, and she felt safe. Not because everything was perfect, but because he was here. Take a deep breath. Let the sound of rain wash over you like a promise. You are sheltered, not just from storms, but within them. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't need words to pray. Sometimes sitting still beneath the sound of God's rain is enough, because he covers you, even now. You carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Galatians 6:2. It was a Tuesday. Eliza remembered because the mail had just come. And Tuesdays were when her little town delivered the local paper full of garden tips and obituaries and church announcements that always seemed to arrive a week late. She just sat down with her tea when she heard a knock. Not hurried, not loud, just gentle. She opened the door to find Ruth standing there, raincoat buttoned wrong, cheeks flushed from the chill. "Oh, I hope I'm not intruding," Ruth said, already stepping inside. Eliza smiled and stepped aside. Intrusions that come with pie are always welcome. Sure enough, Ruth held a small paper bag with the corner of a pie box peeking out. Lemon custard, her favorite. They'd known each other for 40 years, from church gatherings, quilting circles, funerals and baptisms. Ruth had been a nurse once, always a caregiver, even after retirement. But this visit, this wasn't about pie. They sat at the table, just the two of them, steam curling from their mugs, the ticking clock marking time in soft beats. And then Ruth said what Eliza already sensed. "It's been a hard week." Eliza didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She simply reached across the table and wrapped her fingers around Ruth's hand, soft, wrinkled, familiar. They didn't talk much after that. The pie went untouched for almost an hour. Instead, they just sat. And in that silence, something holy happened. Two souls, sitting quietly, no fixing, no explaining. Just being. Eliza had learned something in her later years. Sometimes the greatest act of love is presence. Just being near. You don't need polished answers. You don't need the right thing to say. Sometimes the ministry of quiet is enough. After a long while, Ruth wiped a tear and whispered, "I didn't know I needed to be here, but I think God did." Eliza nodded. He always does. And when Ruth left with the rain just beginning again and the pie still in her hands, Eliza stood by the door a while. Not sad, not tired, just grateful. For friendship that lasts, for burdens that become lighter when shared, for a God who gently brings the right souls to our doorstep when we need them most. Take a deep breath. Let your heart remember the beauty of being known, and the quiet comfort of someone simply sitting with you. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't have to carry it all alone. Love often arrives softly in a knock on the door, a warm hand, a quiet visit, sent by the one who sees you. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still water. He restores my soul. Psalm 23, 1-3. Eliza didn't go far these days. Her steps were slower, and the cane she once resisted had now become a familiar companion. But when the weather was kind, especially in early spring or late autumn, she still made the short walk to the end of her lane, where the old oak tree stood like a quiet sentinel at the bend in the road. That oak had been there longer than any house on Sycamore Lane. Its bark was gnarled and thick, its branches outstretched like open arms, and its roots lifted slightly from the earth, as if it were always in the middle of rising but never rushed. It was her place of pause. She didn't always sit, but when she did, there was an old stone nestled beneath its shade, worn smooth by weather and time. Some local kids had painted a heart on it years ago, now faded but faintly visible. Eliza would rest there, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for much longer. There was no view from the tree, no mountain, no water, just fields and fences and sky. But it felt like a cathedral to her, wide open, spacious, sacred. She often brought nothing but her breath. No phone, no list, no plan, just presence. She'd learned by now how deeply the soul needs quiet places, not just for recovery, but for remembering. At the tree, she remembered who she was without roles. Not wife, not mother, not neighbor. Just Eliza, a woman held by God. She remembered that her soul wasn't measured by productivity, but by presence. And she remembered that the shepherd who walked with her in youth still walked beside her now, even slower, even closer. One afternoon, while resting under the tree, she whispered aloud, "Still waters can be inside too, can't they, Lord?" She felt the wind stir, and she took that as a yes. Take a deep breath. Imagine the shade of the tree, the stillness of the grass, the shepherd walking quietly beside you. You are not lost, you are led. Just bedtime spiritual takeaway. You are still being shepherded. Even in the quiet seasons, God is leading you to still water and restoring your soul in gentle ways. I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with unfailing kindness. Jeremiah 31:3. The frame sat on the shelf above the stove. It had been there for years, untouched, unmoved except for the occasional gentle dusting every Tuesday morning. It held a photo, soft and worn, the edges slightly curled with time. Black and white, slightly faded. Eliza and Jonah, much younger than, standing on a hilltop with wind in their hair and matching smiles that looked more like peace than happiness. She had been 24, he 27. They were newly married, full of untested dreams, and still learning how to hold each other's hearts without fear. That photo had been taken on a day without significance. No holiday, no announcement, no guest, just a walk, a picnic, and a quiet moment where someone had said, "Let me take your picture." Eliza had often thought about that, how some of the most meaningful memories come from the days we forget to mark. That photo captured something tender, not because of what they were doing, but because of what they were becoming. Side by side, known and knowing, loved, even in silence. Now, in the still of her kitchen, with the kettle steaming and the rain still whispering beyond the windows. Eliza often looked at that photo and found herself whispering things she didn't even know she needed to say. "You were kind to me," she said once. "Another time we did well, didn't we?" And just last week, after a night of dreams filled with familiar faces, she looked at the photo and said softly, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me someone who stayed." She didn't idolize Jonah. They had their imperfections, their moments of tension, their tired seasons like every couple. But what she treasured most was the kindness. Kindness in how he listened, in how he made tea when she had headaches, in how he kissed her forehead every night, even after disagreements. That kind of love, it left fingerprints, not just on photo frames, but on the soul. And even now, all these years later, she still felt it, still lived in the gentle shelter of it. Because love, true love, doesn't end. It changes shape, moves deeper, becomes memory, prayer, presence. And on quiet evenings, when the wind nudged the curtains and the air smelled faintly of tea and lemon oil, she would glance at that photo and smile. Still loved, still held. Take a deep breath. Let your memories become gentle, not as grief, but as gifts. Love remains, even now. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. The love you've known, the real, quiet, faithful love doesn't leave you. It becomes part of who you are, and a reflection of how God has always loved you. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalm 119, 105. Eliza didn't keep many lights on at night anymore. Just the small lamp in the hallway and the candle by her bedside. The candle was part of her evening ritual, a small flame nestled in a simple glass jar, resting on a wooden tray near her Bible and a folded handkerchief. She lit it not because she needed light. The lamp nearby was brighter than but the candle. It offered something gentler. It flickered. It moved. It breathed. And in its soft glow, she felt held. It had started years ago after Jonah passed. The nights had felt colder then, not just in the air, but in her spirit. The bed was too large, the silence too loud. Sleep did not come easily. She tried all the usual comforts: warm milk, soft music, a hot water bottle at her feet. But it was the candle that changed things. That first night, she had lit it on a whim, more out of habit than faith. But as she lay in bed, the flame danced softly across the walls, casting long shadows that seemed peaceful. It reminded her of something ancient, the way people used to sit by firelight, letting the day go. The way light, however small, pushed back the dark, not all at once, but enough. And most of all, it reminded her that God was there, even in the hush of night. Since then, she lit it each evening. She'd open her Bible, read a verse or two slowly, like chewing bread, and then whisper a prayer. Often simple, often just a breath. Be near, Lord. Sometimes she'd talk to him about her aches, about the children she hadn't heard from in a while, about the dreams she still had. She never felt silly bringing those things to him. He had carried her this far. Why not carry her through the night? The candle would burn for just a little while. She'd watch it from her pillow until her eyes grew heavy, until the room blurred, until the flame became a quiet memory in the dark. And somehow, she always slept a little deeper on those nights. Not because the candle had power, but because she had remembered the light. Take a deep breath. Let the flicker of that imagined flame warm your spirit. You are not alone in the night. The light is near. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even in the darkest night, the smallest light reminds us God is still here. Watching, holding, staying. In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength. Isaiah 30:15. It was often just before sleep that hour when the house settled. The wind stilled, and the world felt far away that Eliza would hear it. Not an audible voice, not something with syllables or sound, but a knowing, a presence, a whisper that had no need for volume because it came from inside her own spirit. She called it the voice in the quiet hour. It didn't always come. Some nights were just rest and dreams and soft blankets. But sometimes, especially when her heart had been stirred that day by a memory, a letter, a prayer, the voice would come. Not to speak instruction, but to speak love. Once, years ago, after a long week of sadness she hadn't been able to name, she had laid in bed staring at the ceiling, blinking against the dark. She hadn't prayed that night, not with words, only sighed, deeply, from somewhere inside, and then it came. Not through the room. Through her. You're safe now. She hadn't expected it. It didn't stop the sadness completely, but it made her feel held inside it, like being wrapped in a shawl woven from silence. That was how God often came to her in these years, not in revelations or thunderous answers, but in the quiet permission to rest, to breathe without explanation, to be loved without needing to do anything. That's what she treasured most about growing older. There was less performing, less striving. She didn't have to prove her worth anymore. She didn't have to earn her place. She already belonged. And in those quiet hours, she could hear it more clearly. You are mine, still mine, always mine. The voice never shamed her, never hurried her. It only stayed. Patient, present, tender. Now, as she lay beneath her quilt, eyes heavy with the kind of peace that comes after remembering who you are, she breathed a final prayer. Stay close tonight, Lord. And in the stillness, she knew he already was. Take a deep breath. Let quietness become your strength. Let the nearness of God hold you as you are, with no need to strive. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't have to chase his voice in the quiet hour when all else fades. He whispers the same truth again and again. You are loved. You are mine. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. Psalm 34:5. That night, Eliza dreamed of the garden. Not the one in her backyard with its daisies and bird bath, but the first one, the hidden one behind the green door. She hadn't dreamed of it in years. And yet there it was, just as it had been when she was 17, the ivy curling around the frame, the wooden latch soft with age. The way the morning sun filtered in like gold dust through the trees. In the dream, she stood at the entrance once again, not young, not old, just herself. She reached out and the door opened without sound, not even a creak. And inside, nothing had changed. The bench stood quietly at the center, half in sunlight, half in shade. A breeze moved through the leaves, not cold, not warm, just right. The garden didn't need tending. It seemed alive with peace. And as she walked further in, her steps were light as if her bones remembered joy and left heaviness behind. She sat not because she was tired, but because it felt right. And there, in that old place of quiet, she noticed someone sitting beside her. She didn't look quickly. She didn't need to. She knew it was him. Not a face like in paintings, not a robe or crown, but presence. Peace in person. He didn't speak with words, but she heard everything. You've always been welcome here. You never left, you know. Even when life pulled you away, you carried the garden in you. She let that truth wash over her, and then she remembered something. She wasn't dreaming of the past. She was dreaming of forever, because this garden, this hush, this companionship, this light, it wasn't just memory. It was promise, a glimpse of what was waiting. Not a place, exactly, a presence. The place where all her longings would rest, where all questions would quiet, where all burdens would fall gently to the earth and dissolve like dew in the morning sun. And in the dream, she smiled, not because she was ready to leave, but because she no longer feared what was ahead, because the garden, the presence, had always been leading her home. She woke with tears on her cheek, not of sorrow, of recognition. Take a deep breath. Let your soul wander there for a moment into the quiet place he's prepared for you. Even now, a garden where you are already known and forever loved. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. The peace you long for is not far off. The garden of God's presence has already taken root in your soul. And one day, you'll walk in it fully, forever. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23:6. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes only at the end of something long and faithful. The candle by the bedside had burned low. A single light in the hallway stayed on, not because she needed it, but because Eliza always said it felt kind to leave a light for the Lord. It was something her grandmother used to say. Always leave a light on at night. You never know what angels might be passing through. And now, after a lifetime of gardens and griefs, letters and losses, porch swings and prayers, Eliza sat once more by her window. The stars were scattered across the sky like promises too big to fit in books. The tea was cool now, half sipped, and her hands the same ones that had written prayers. Baked bread, tended to children and tended to wounds, lay quietly in her lap. She was not afraid. Not tonight, because the garden, the true garden, was not just a place she once knew. It was where she had always been headed. Every act of love, every quiet choice, every whispered prayer and moment of mercy, they had all been paving the way toward him. And now, she could feel it. The nearness, not as an ending, but as a beginning. She stood slowly, walked to the small table by her bed, and gently blew out the candle. She did not say goodnight. She said, "I'll see you soon." And with that, she lay down and slept in peace, in love, in the garden of the quiet heart. Forever. Take a deep breath. Let everything release. You are safe now. You are loved, deeply and eternally. And one day, when all is quiet, you too will walk fully into the presence that has always walked beside you. Final bedtime spiritual takeaway. You are being led home, not in fear, but in peace. With every breath you are carried, and when the time comes, love will be there to meet you. The garden is real, and the gate is always open.